Could a trip to a bat cave land you in the hospital with a hemorrhagic fever? It sounds crazy, right? Like something out of a movie.
Yeah.
But for those who've encountered the Marburg virus, it's a terrifying reality. We've
God.
got a whole bunch of research here.
Oh,
Articles, historical accounts, outbreak reports, all about Marburg. And it's a story you won't soon forget.
it's fascinating, really. Even though it's rare, Marburg reminds us just how vulnerable we are to these emerging viruses.
Yeah.
It's a real detective story, It takes us from labs in Europe to caves in Africa.
So let's rewind the clock to 1967. Imagine lab workers in Marburg, Germany, start feeling sick,
Right.
like they have a bad flu, fevers, headaches, the whole 9 yards. But then things take a turn for the worse. Some get a rash, start bleeding,
Oh, wow.
and some even have organ failure. A few even die. Talk about a medical mystery.
It was a scary situation, that's for sure. Turns out the source was African green monkeys, brought in for polio vaccine research. Scientists had never seen anything like it.
It's wild to think this was the first time a filovirus,
Mm.
like Ebola, was ever found. And they isolated and identified it within 3 months.
3 months?
Yeah,
That's amazing.
right.
Yeah, that's some serious scientific detective work. They figured out this virus was completely different with its filamentous shape. The whole scientific community was in shock.
Okay, so we have this mysterious virus appearing in a lab, but the story doesn't end there.
Yeah.
Years later, we see more outbreaks, mostly in Africa. Like there's a massive one in Angola in 2004 with over 250 cases.
Yeah, and get this. Contaminated transfusion equipment played a big role in that
Oh,
one.
geez.
It really shows how important infection control is, especially in healthcare.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Then there are those outbreaks in Uganda, one in 2012 tied to funeral practices, and another in 2017 connected to bats in a salt mine.
Right.
Each outbreak is another piece of the puzzle.
Right.
But you mentioned bats earlier. What's the deal with bats in Marburg?
Well, scientists think Egyptian fruit bats are the natural reservoir for the Marburg virus, meaning they carry it but don't get sick.
So they're like silent spreaders.
Yeah, exactly. Spreading it without even knowing.
Wow, silent spreaders.
Yeah.
Makes you think twice about going into those caves, right? So if bats are the source, how does it jump to us?
Human activity has a lot to do with it. As we move into bat habitats like forests, caves, mines,
Right.
the bats shed the virus in their, droppings, urine, and saliva. So if that stuff gets in your eyes, nose, mouth, or a cut, you could be infected.
That's kind of scary.
Yeah.
And to make things worse, there's that outbreak in Rwanda just last year, in 2024, that really hit healthcare workers hard.
Yeah.
It shows how vulnerable those on the front lines are.
Yeah, for sure. Protecting healthcare workers is crucial, not just for them, but to contain any outbreak.
Okay, so contact with infected bats starts it, but we also know it can spread from person to person. How does that happen?
It's mainly through direct contact with bodily fluids. Blood, saliva, vomit,
Uh-huh.
even semen.
Wait, semen. That's not something you hear every day. Why is that so important?
Well, because it shows just how contagious Marburg is. It can actually stick around in semen for months after someone recovers.
Really?
Yeah, so sexual transmission is a real possibility, even long after the initial illness.
Okay, now I'm really starting to understand why this virus is such a big deal. It's not just about bats. It's human behavior, cultural practices, and this potential for it to, linger and spread in unexpected ways.
Mm.
But say someone is infected. What can they expect? What are the symptoms?
Well, the early stages can be tricky. It often looks like other illnesses like malaria or typhoid fever, headache, chills, that kind of thing.
So it's not just a bad flu then?
Oh, not at all. The virus attacks multiple organs, leading to what's called the early organ phase.
Early organ phase.
Yeah. You get intense gastrointestinal symptoms, diarrhea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and then a rash shows up, often widespread, sometimes with conjunctivitis inflammation of the eyes.
Oh, that sounds awful. And we mentioned bleeding earlier. Is that common?
It's definitely possible. Marburg messes with the body's clotting, so some people have internal and external bleeding. It's not always there, but when it happens, it can be really bad.
Really bad. How?
Like life-threatening, leading to organ failure and death.
And all of this can happen within days of getting infected.
Yeah, it can move that fast. But the physical stuff is only part of it. It can also mess with your brain. Some cases have reported confusion, delirium, even aggression.
Sounds terrifying. So let's say you think you might have Marburg. What then? How do you know for sure?
The most important thing is immediate isolation to stop it from spreading. Diagnosis relies on lab testing. RT-PCR is what they use. It's
Yeah.
very sensitive and specific. It can detect the virus's genetic material in blood.
Okay, so let's say we have a confirmed case. Is there a cure? Some pill we can take to make it go away?
Sadly, no. Right now, there are no approved therapies for Marburg virus disease.
Ooh, approved therapies. So what happens to someone who gets infected? What are their options?
That's where supportive care is so important. It's about managing the symptoms, stopping things from getting worse, and giving the body the best chance to fight back.
So it's a race against time for the body's defenses to kick in.
Yeah, kinda.
But without specific treatments, what are the odds of surviving?
Sadly, survival rates for Marburg are pretty low. But the good news is research into potential treatments is ongoing, and there's been some progress.
Okay, let's hear about that. Where are scientists focusing their energy?
Well, one exciting area is monoclonal antibody therapy. You've probably heard about that.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
They're like guided missiles that seek out and destroy the virus.
Guided missiles, huh? That sounds pretty intense. How do they work?
So they're antibodies made in the lab that target very specific parts of the virus, like those glycoprotein spikes we were talking about.
Right.
Basically, they stop the virus from grabbing onto and getting into human cells.
So it's like putting up a wall to keep the virus out.
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay, I like that. Has this approach worked against Marburg?
It has. One example is the monoclonal antibody called MBP-091.
MBP-091.
Yeah. It goes after the part of Marburg that lets it latch onto human cells.
So if it can't attach, it can't infect,
Right. And studies with monkeys infected with Marburg showed that MBP-091 really helped their survival rates.
Really?
And get this, even when it was given 5 days after they were exposed.
5 days. Wow, that's incredible. Like a second chance.
It is pretty amazing.
So MBP-091 isn't the only one they're looking at, right?
No, there are a bunch more in different stages of research. What's exciting is that this approach is pretty flexible. You can adapt it to target different types of Marburg, even other filoviruses.
It's like having a customizable weapon in the fight against these viruses. That's amazing. Monoclonal antibodies seem to be leading the way. Are there any other promising treatments on the horizon?
Well, scientists are also working on antiviral drugs, some of which have actually been tested against Ebola with some success. The idea is to directly attack the virus's ability to make copies of itself, to sort of disrupt its copying process.
So antivirals are like fighting fire with fire.
Yeah, something like that. One they're looking at is remdesivir. You might recognize that from the COVID-19 pandemic.
Remdesivir, right.
It's already approved for emergency use for Ebola, and now they're seeing if it could work against Marburg.
Interesting. But remdesivir wasn't like a miracle cure for COVID. Is there a reason to think it might work better against Marburg?
Well, every virus is different.
Right.
So how a drug works against one doesn't mean it'll work the same way against another. But all the work with remdesivir during the pandemic taught us a lot about quickly testing and using treatments for new viruses.
Okay, so we're using what we learned to be ready for future threats.
Exactly.
Makes sense. Are there any other antivirals they're thinking about?
Yeah, another one getting attention is favipiravir.
Favipiravir.
It seems to work by messing with the virus's ability to copy its genetic material so it can't make more copies of itself.
So it's like cutting off the virus's supply chain.
Exactly. And there's some evidence favipiravir could be effective against a whole bunch of RNA viruses, including Marburg.
So it's like a multi-purpose tool?
Yeah, in a way. But like with all these treatments, we need more research.
Research is key.
Oh.
Speaking of research, what about vaccines? Are we any closer to having a Marburg vaccine?
Now, vaccines are the ultimate goal in this fight.
That's true.
And the progress is actually pretty impressive.
Oh, that's great.
Remember Marburg, the consortium we talked about? They're working really hard, and they've got multiple promising candidates in development.
That's good to hear. Can you give us a sneak peek into what they're testing?
Sure. One of the leading candidates is a recombinant vesicular stomatitis virus vaccine, or RVSV for short.
RVSV.
It uses a harmless virus, vesicular stomatitis virus, to deliver a little piece of the Marburg virus into the body.
A harmless virus? How does that work?
Think of it like a Trojan horse.
Okay.
This modified virus carries a bit of Marburg, but it can't actually make you sick. It basically tricks your body into thinking it's been infected with Marburg, so your immune system learns how to fight it off without you actually getting sick.
So your immune system gets a preview and learns to defeat the enemy.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty smart.
And this RVSV platform has already been used for an Ebola vaccine, so it's promising.
It has a track record.
It does.
That's reassuring. So RVSV isn't the only one in the running, is it?
Nope. Another strategy is a prime boost approach. It combines an initial dose of a recombinant adenovirus vaccine, which gets the immune system going, and then a booster dose of a modified Vaccinia Ankara vaccine, or MVA.
So it's like a 1-2 punch to knock out the virus.
You got it. And this prime boost thing has worked with other diseases, so it could work for Marburg, too.
It's promising, for sure.
It is. And then there's the potential of recombinant chimpanzee adenovirus vaccines. They've actually been used in some recent outbreaks. We don't have all the data on how well they work yet, but they're another exciting option.
Wow, so many possibilities for fighting Marburg. It's amazing how far vaccine development has come.
It really is. And what we learned from making vaccines for Ebola and even COVID-19 has helped speed things up.
It seems like we're on the verge of some big breakthroughs.
Yeah, I think so too.
That's awesome.
But there are still challenges like making enough of these vaccines for everyone, getting them to the people who need them,
Yeah.
and making sure they're safe.
Those are all important things to consider. But it's good to know that the scientific community is on it.
Definitely. It really shows what can be done when people work together.
It does.
Yeah.
So we've talked about Marburg's history, how it spreads, the symptoms,
Right.
the progress on treatments, and the promising vaccine developments. It's amazing how this rare virus reminds us of the connection between human health and animal health.
That's a really important point. We often forget that what we do impacts the balance of nature.
For sure. If we want to prevent outbreaks, we need to understand these connections and try to minimize those spillover events.
And
It's not just about reacting after something happens. It's about being proactive.
right. Being prepared, knowing what to look for, and taking steps to prevent it.
Well said. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's zoom in on the virus itself. We've talked about its shape, how it spreads, how it affects the body. But what exactly is the Marburg virus? What makes it tick?
That's a great question. To understand Marburg, we need to go microscopic to its genetic blueprint, its structure, and the machinery that lets it make copies of itself and spread.
Sounds like we're going on a microscopic adventure.
We are. And trust me, the world of viruses is full of surprises.
I'm ready. Let's unravel the secrets of Marburg virus, one molecule at a time.
Okay, let's start with the basics. Marburg is a single-stranded RNA virus. This means its genetic information is encoded in a single strand of RNA, unlike our DNA, which is double-stranded.
RNA, the messenger molecule, right? The one that carries genetic instructions. How does that work for a virus?
For Marburg, this single strand of RNA is like a set of instructions for building new viruses. It's super compact and efficient, containing everything the virus needs to take over a host cell and make more of itself.
So it's like a tiny pirate ship with a treasure map to take over a bigger ship.
That's a perfect analogy. That's exactly how viruses work. They're basically tiny packages of genetic material that need a host cell to survive and reproduce.
So how does this RNA pirate ship actually work? How does it take over a host cell?
The first step is getting in. Marburg uses its outer shell or envelope, which has these glycoprotein spikes sticking out.
Right, those spikes.
Those spikes act like keys fitting into specific receptors on the surface of host cells.
So it's a lock and key situation.
Exactly. Once the virus attaches, it fuses its envelope with the cell's membrane and releases its RNA cargo inside.
Sneaky. But what happens once it's inside? Does it just start copying itself?
It's not quite that simple. The virus's RNA needs to be translated into proteins to build new viruses, so it hijacks the host cell's machinery.
So it takes over the control room and forces the factory to produce virus parts.
Exactly. The virus's RNA takes control of the cell's ribosomes, which are like protein-making factories,
I remember those from biology class.
and makes them produce viral proteins instead of the cell's own proteins.
To a hostile takeover. But wait, I thought ribosomes read DNA, not RNA.
That's true for us humans, but viruses, especially RNA viruses like Marburg, have found ways around that. They have their own enzymes that can transcribe RNA into DNA, which the ribosomes can then read.
Wow, viruses are sneaky. So what do these viral proteins do?
They're the building blocks for new viruses. They assemble themselves into new viral particles complete with RNA genomes and those glycoprotein spikes. Then, these new viruses bud off from the host cell, ready to infect more cells and repeat the cycle.
So it's a chain reaction. Each infected cell produces a whole army of new viruses.
Exactly. That's how the virus spreads throughout the body, causing all those terrible symptoms we talked about.
It's crazy how something so tiny can cause so much damage. But does the virus just replicate freely? Doesn't our immune system try to fight back?
Of course it does. But Marburg has some tricks to evade our immune system.
You can't be that easy to trick our immune system. What kind of tricks are we talking about?
For example, Marburg can interfere with the production of interferons. These are molecules that signal the immune system that there's a virus. Think of it like jamming the alarm system.
Sneaky. So it silences the alarms. What else does it do?
Marburg can also mess with the function of immune cells like macrophages and dendritic cells, which are really important for fighting infections.
So the virus is playing chess with our immune system.
No.
Always one step ahead.
It's a tough opponent, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But figuring out how it evades our defenses is crucial for developing treatments and vaccines that work.
So knowledge is power. The more we know about Marburg's tricks, the better we can fight back. We've covered its RNA, its envelope, those spiky glycoproteins, its ability to hijack cells and evade the immune system. What else makes Marburg unique? What else makes it Marburg?
To really get into the details, we need to talk about the 7 genes that make up the Marburg virus genome.
7 genes. That doesn't seem like a lot.
Viruses are incredibly efficient. They've stripped their genetic code down to the bare essentials, focusing on what's absolutely necessary to survive and replicate.
So what are these 7 essential proteins and what do they do?
We've already talked about a few. The glycoprotein, or GP, forms those spikes on the surface, allowing it to attach to and enter host cells. Then there's the nucleoprotein, or NP, which protects the RNA genome and helps package it into new viral particles.
Those sound like crucial jobs. It's like the virus has its own specialized team.
Exactly. Then we have VP40, which is key for assembling new viral particles and helping them bud off from the host cell.
So like a construction mannequin.
Yeah, you could say that. But it also helps to suppress the host's immune response.
Double duty. What about the other proteins?
Well, there's VP35, which also helps with replication and messes with the host's immune system. Then there's VP30, which acts like a transcription factor, controlling the production of viral proteins.
Okay.
And finally, there's VP24 and the L protein. VP24 helps to stabilize the viral particle, and the L protein is the real star, the RNA polymerase, the enzyme responsible for copying the virus's RNA genome.
So many players for such a small virus. It's like a well-oiled machine, with each protein playing its part to keep the virus going.
That's a great way to put it. And the more we understand about these proteins, the better we can target them with treatments and vaccines.
It's fascinating, but it also makes you realize how complex this virus is. It's not just some random blob of genetic material. It's a sophisticated organism with its own set of rules and ways to survive.
Exactly. And that's what makes studying viruses so challenging and rewarding. They're always surprising us with their ability to adapt, survive, and find our weaknesses.
It makes you appreciate the complexities of nature, even at the tiniest level. I have to say, I'm starting to feel a grudging respect for this tiny but powerful virus.
I get it.
But don't get me wrong, I still wouldn't want to get anywhere near it.
I hear you. It's a healthy respect. It reminds us to stay vigilant and proactive in preventing and controlling infectious diseases.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, and the more we understand viruses like Marburg, the better prepared we'll be. But before we wrap things up, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the epidemiology of Marburg. Let's dive into the patterns of outbreaks, the risks of infection, and the global efforts to track and contain this deadly pathogen.
Sounds good to me. Let's explore the world of epidemiology and see what we can learn about Marburg's movements and how to stay one step ahead.
So we've explored the Marburg virus pretty in depth now, from its microscopic structure to its global impact. Now, let's talk about the fight against this disease. What's being done to develop effective treatments and hopefully a vaccine?
Yeah, that's the big question everyone's asking. The good news is there's a lot of promising research happening right now. As we've said, there's no quick fix for Marburg, but scientists are working hard to find different ways to treat it.
That's good to hear. What are some of the most promising areas? What's giving scientists reason for optimism?
One of the most exciting areas is monoclonal antibody therapy. Well, you might have heard of it.
Monoclonal antibodies, yeah.
They're like, the superheroes of the immune system designed to target and take out invaders.
Right, like a targeted strike force.
Exactly. So they're lab-created antibodies that act like the ones our bodies make naturally. The difference is they're engineered to be super precise. They zero in on specific parts of a virus, like those glycoprotein spikes.
So instead of a general immune response, it's like a laser-focused attack.
You got it. And that's what makes them so promising for fighting viruses like Marburg.
Less damage, more accuracy. I like it. But have they shown any success against Marburg so far?
They have. One promising candidate is called MBP091. It's designed to bind to a specific part of the Marburg virus's glycoprotein, the part that lets it attach to human cells.
So if the virus can't attach, it can't infect, right?
Exactly. And studies with monkeys infected with Marburg have shown MBP091 can really boost survival rates, even when it's given 5 days after infection.
5 days after. Wow, that's a long time.
It is. It's like a second chance.
It is. So is MBP-091 the only one in the pipeline?
Not at all. There are many more being developed and tested. What's cool is that this approach is very adaptable. It can be tailored to target different strains of Marburg or even other filoviruses.
So it's like a weapon we can customize depending on the threat. That's pretty impressive. So monoclonal antibodies seem to be a front runner. Are there any other promising treatments in the works?
Yes, scientists are also looking into antiviral drugs. These work by directly interfering with the virus's ability to replicate. Like imagine disrupting the virus's factory, stopping it from making
It's
copies.
like sabotage from the inside.
Right. One drug getting attention is remdesivir. You might remember that one from the COVID-19 pandemic.
Remdesivir, yeah. It was all over the news.
It's already approved for emergency use for Ebola, and they're researching whether it could work for Marburg too.
Interesting. But remdesivir wasn't a miracle cure for COVID. Is there a reason to think it might work better against Marburg?
Well, remember, each virus is different, so a drug's effectiveness against one doesn't guarantee it'll work the same way against another. But the experience with remdesivir during the pandemic taught us valuable lessons about how to test and use treatments for new viruses quickly.
So we're using those lessons learned to be better prepared.
Exactly.
Makes sense. Are there other antivirals being considered?
Another one that's interesting is favipiravir. It's approved in some countries for the flu, and it works by blocking a key enzyme that the virus needs to replicate its RNA.
So it throws a wrench in the virus's machinery, stops it from making more copies.
Exactly. And because Marburg is an RNA virus, like influenza, there's a chance favipiravir could work against it too.
It's like a multi-tool.
Yeah, kinda. But more research is needed, as always.
Research is essential. Speaking of which, what about vaccines? Are we getting closer to a Marburg vaccine? That would be a game changer.
You're right. Vaccines are the ultimate goal, and there's been great progress in developing one for Marburg.
That's fantastic news. What kinds of vaccines are in development?
Well, one of the leading contenders is a recombinant vesicular stomatitis virus vaccine, or RVSV for short.
RVSE, okay.
It uses a harmless virus, vesicular stomatitis virus, to deliver a piece of Marburg's genetic material into the body.
A harmless virus, how does that work?
Think of it like a Trojan horse. This modified virus carries a bit of Marburg, but it can't make you sick. It tricks your body into thinking it's been infected with Marburg, so your immune system learns to fight it off without you actually getting sick.
Ah, so your immune system gets a sneak peek at the enemy
Right.
and learns how to defeat it.
Exactly. This RVSV platform has already been used successfully for an Ebola vaccine, so it's promising.
That's reassuring. A proven track record.
Yeah.
Are there other approaches besides RVSV?
Yes. Another strategy is a prime boost approach. This combines an initial dose of a recombinant adenovirus vaccine to kickstart the immune response, followed by a booster dose of a modified vaccinia Ankara vaccine, or MVA.
A 1-2 punch, I like it.
Yep. And this prime boost approach has also been successful with other diseases, so there's optimism for Marburg, too.
So many potential weapons against Marburg. It's amazing how far vaccine development has come.
It really is. And the lessons learned from making vaccines for Ebola and even COVID-19 have really helped speed things up.
It sounds like we're on the verge of some major breakthroughs. What are some of the challenges researchers still face with developing a vaccine?
Well, there's still work to be done. Figuring out how to produce enough vaccines for everyone, getting those vaccines to everyone who needs them, and of course ensuring the vaccines are safe, those are all important hurdles.
Those are big challenges, but it's encouraging to see scientists working hard to make a Marburg vaccine a reality.
For sure. And the global collaboration and data sharing have been incredible. It's really a testament to the scientific community and their commitment to protecting humanity from infectious diseases.
That's inspiring.
Absolutely. While there are still challenges, the progress in fighting Marburg is remarkable. And as we continue to learn and work together, a future without the threat of Marburg becomes more and more possible.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us. It's been fascinating learning about the Marburg virus, from the virus itself to the global efforts to combat it. I feel much more informed and hopeful after our conversation.
That's great to hear. Remember, knowledge is power. By understanding Marburg, we can help protect ourselves and our communities.
Well said. And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive into the world of Marburg has been insightful and empowering. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay healthy. Until next time.